The Fallen. Written by Clay A. Kahler. Narrated by Mike Ortego. Chapter 1. Reverend Allen? Upon hearing his name, Coy slowly looked up from the commentary that he was studying. Seeing the uniform-clad figure standing in his doorway, Coy was suddenly and instantly transported. Gone was the commentary that he had been reading. Gone was the polished oak desk that he sat behind. Gone was the high-back leather chair. Gone was his spacious office lined on each wall with bookshelves. Without warning, he was no longer Dr. Coy Allen, senior pastor of Millview Baptist Church in Oscar, Texas. No, instead he was Coy Allen, youngest son of Dorothy and Hubert Allen, playing in a dusty yard outside of a small house in Freebold, Texas. "Welcome to Freebold, the boomtown you have been searching for," read the faded and dilapidated sign on the outskirts of town. Freebold could have been any number of small dusty towns in West Texas. If you were a visitor driving into the small village on Main Street, the town would strike you as rather unremarkable. Though there were 15 or 20 buildings that lined Main Street, in 1978 there were only 5 businesses that were left open. On the south side of the street was Lucinda's beauty shop. Lucinda's was a landmark in its own right. The faded blue clapboard building, highlighted by the bright pink shutters surrounding the dusty windows, had stood the test of time. Lucinda's was known as the cultural center of Freebold's feminine population. The ladies of the community would gather there during the day to have their big hairstyles reinflated and lacquered with hairspray, and to catch up on the latest news. With a number of empty, vacant buildings separating it from Lucinda's was Watson's Liquor Store. Though not maintained in nearly as good a condition as Lucinda's, Watson's was just as busy. The other buildings on the south side of the street stood vacant, paint peeling, windows broken, looking very much like run-down monuments of better days gone by. As you looked down the north side of the street, the financial picture of Freebold did not appear to be much better. The first open business that you would have seen was a small grocery store run by a kindly old man named Mr. Garcia, who was known to slip hard candy to the kids who visited with their mothers. Further down the street was the post office, the only brick building on Main Street. At the end of the street was Scooter's garage. If Lucinda's was the cultural center for feminine life in Freebold, Scooter's was the haven for the menfolk. There one might overhear the daily conversation of the town's elders, men dressed in faded overalls or well-worn Wrangler jeans, Stetson hats, and John Deere caps, spitting and discussing the never-changing weather. "It sure is a hot one." "Yeah, but that's a dry heat." "Jackson lost a couple of head of cattle out on his place." "Yeah, the coyotes are thick this year." Though these were the only businesses on Main Street that were open, there were other businesses in town. Just outside the city limits was the farm and supply store. One of the men of the town had a barber shop in his garage, and, of course, 2 streets east of Main Street and across the abandoned railroad tracks was Austin Street, where the city hall stood. And, finally, at the southeast corner of town, you would find a dusty little street, Pine Street. Pine Street, however, could hardly be called a street at all. This narrow, dusty thoroughfare was filled with more gravel and potholes than asphalt. As you turn off the main street and gingerly negotiate your way down Pine, you would notice the tiny, poorly maintained homes that lined each side of the road. One thing all these little houses had in common was the incredible amount of refuse that filled the yards surrounding them, and the stark lack of grass. On any given day, your progress would likely be halted by a championship neighborhood football game, or one of the many Evel Knievels preparing some death-defying leap off a poorly constructed ramp. Were it not for the oppressive heat, you might have your windows down. Then you would hear the squeals and giggles of children playing, intermingled with the violent outburst of a drunken husband berating his young wife. And this was Pine Street, Freehold, Texas, the proving ground of the Allen boys. Hubert and Dorothy Allen made a home for their 2 children here in the last house on Pine Street. The Allen house blended in well with the rest of the Pine Street homes. This sturdy, old 2-story clapboard house had seen a lot of history. It had housed 5 families prior to becoming the residence of Hubert and family. Just like the other houses on that side of town, it was built according to a very specific plan. A plan dictated by the now-defunct Freehold Oil Company. These prefabricated homes had the appearance of having seen very little maintenance since the FOC ceased its drilling operations. The weathered front door of the Allen home opened into a small living room. This is where you could bet on finding Hubert on the couch in some level of drunkenness, half watching some news program or sitcom. Directly opposite the front door stood a doorless entry into the small, poorly equipped kitchen. To the left of it was a second doorway that led to either Hubert and Dorothy's room, or up the stairs, or to the one bathroom in the small house. Upstairs was the small, cramped room that Coy and Johnny called home. At the back of the kitchen was the back door that led out to the small yard, which contained a poorly constructed tool shed, and beyond that, a forest of mesquite trees. Hubert, an out-of-work construction worker, was a man that tended to settle differences with his fists. He wasn't a horrible father or husband. He did take the boys fishing, taught them to be men. But like many men who had found themselves out of work for an extended period of time, Hubert discovered the comfort of the bottle. With her husband being out of work, Dorothy took the mantle of provision on her own shoulders. She was a slight, homely woman, who openly wore the cares and worries of the years on her face, giving her the appearance of being 10 years older than she was. Dorothy brought in a meager income cleaning houses and taking in laundry. She was a soft-spoken, demure, proper Texas young lady. While it was her husband's duty to teach her boys to become men, it was her duty to make sure they became good men. On Saturdays, Hubert would take the boys fishing, or wrestle with them in the front yard, or help them construct their latest invention. But on Sundays, Dorothy took over. Every Sunday she would gather up her 2 boys, leaving her hungover husband at home, and walk with them up Pine Street, take a ride on Ash, continue up 4 blocks, take a left on Brook Street, where they attended Brook Street Baptist Church. And every Sunday, Coy would be dressed and ready to go, while Johnny huffed and puffed and cried and screamed and begged and pleaded for the freedom not to. Upon arriving at the church, Coy would immediately run down the stairs to his Sunday school class. He couldn't wait to find out what amazing lesson was waiting for him. Meanwhile, Johnny would shuffle his feet, visit the restroom, and eventually find his way to his classroom, where he would slump in the corner and not pay attention. After Sunday school, and after the church service was complete, the trio would begin their walk back home, Coy bursting open with his newly discovered information, Dorothy excited to hear all about it, and Johnny oblivious to it all. The few that knew this family were quick to point out that though Johnny was just like his daddy, Coy, 2 years Johnny's junior, had the sweet spirit of his mother. Reverend Allen? Coy was quickly propelled through time back to Oscar, Texas, back to Millview Baptist Church, back to his office, where this uniformed intruder stood waiting acknowledgement. Reluctantly, Coy slowly stood up from his desk and looked at the officer that was still waiting at the door of his study. "Yes, I'm sorry," Coy said, greeting the man, already suspecting the answer he asked. "How can I help you?" Reverend Allen, my name is Captain Marlon Davis from the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville. As the words crawled out of his mouth in that slow West Texas drawl, Coy recognized with contempt the low breeding and lack of education that he had been fleeing from most of his adult life. "Captain Davis, please come in and have a seat," Coy said with as much grace as he could muster. As Coy came around his desk to greet this trespasser with a half-hearted handshake, he wondered where his secretary, Susie, was. "Reverend, I'm here on behalf of Warden Marsh. There is an inmate scheduled for execution who has requested a meeting with you." Coy was in the process of lowering his 6'5" frame into his chair when the captain's words forced him down with a sudden thud. The sound of Coy's collapse startled the captain. However, both men came to a silent agreement that it never happened. Coy had not seen nor spoken to his brother Johnny for at least 18 years, not since his conviction. As he sat there in dread, haunting memories of the past came flooding in on him.